Hi guys, okay, so today I'm very excited because I am finishing up my Book of Shadows today. Um, this has been a long time coming. It's been a very long time to get to this point where I can finally say that I'm done. Now, I'm a perfectionist, and if any of you guys are artists out there, you know how hard it is to get to a point where you're satisfied. And that's one of the many things that this project has taught me. I tend to learn a lot of life lessons through my projects. So I wanted to take some time today and just kind of reminisce about this project and what it means to me and just like have a little bit of a closure moment for a second. Um, because it's been a lot. Now, one of the things like that's a good place to start is the whole, when is something done? And when I made this book, my expectations were based off of an experience that I had, where my expectations weren't met. And a long time ago, I wanted to make a charmed book. I'm 25 right now. I started when I was like 11. I watched Charmed like in 2007 was the first time I saw it, which was a year after it ended. But I was only like 10. So I watched it very young, and when I was like 11, I tried to make my own book. I was constantly searching online for someone who could make a really great book, like obsessively searching the same like things over and over, desperately looking for somebody who could make one that was up to the standards that I really wanted. And I think a huge pull in my artistic kind of journey was there's like a quote in Halloween Town where Aggie says, she's like, magic is really very simple. All you have to do is want something and let yourself have it. And for me, that's kind of what art has done. It's been that thing, the creative ability to envision something that you want or that you set your sights on creating or having, and being able to manifest that into the real world through the process of making something. And the really important thing about this project for me was that I started out, obviously I had made, my first book. I ordered it from some, person, offline, and I got it, and it took almost a year to get to me because they took months and months and months to make these books. I honestly don't know why, but they just did. And after like 10, 11, 12 months or something, I finally got the book. And it was not what I expected. It was like a bright turquoise, and the triquetra on the front was like cut out of another piece of like it was layers of cut pieces of leather, almost like a craft project. It was just like it didn't have any resemblance to the original, other than like it was vaguely kind of like the style of a Charmed book. And so I was so disappointed that I really lost the momentum. I didn't make a book. I just was like, okay, whatever. And then life kind of took hold, and I went to college, and I set my sights on other dreams. And going to college was like really difficult. Not because of the art and all of the like the reason I was there. It was just I moved away from home. I kind of isolated myself. It was kind of a weird experience of just being alone and trying really hard to focus on myself and reach my goals. I went to animation school. I wanted to be an animator, and do special effects and create magic for others. And I got to the end of college, and I know this is like a big roundabout story, but I got to the end of college, and it really was a letdown again. Another letdown in a huge dream of mine. I spent a lot of money going to colleges, obviously a lot of us do, and I was left severely disappointed. My goal, like my dream, was to make a short film that was mine, that could be an expression of some of the stories or the things that I had in my heart and my mind. And I was kind of at the last moment ushered in. They changed the program. I was put in a group of people, and I didn't really have to. I didn't have enough of a say of what we were making, and I was kind of just like, there was politics with this group dynamic, so it was a toxic experience. And let alone the fact that I wasn't even able to make my own film. So when I got to the end of it, I was really disappointed because I didn't get to do what I had worked for 4 years of isolation and like dedication and like working so hard towards. That I thought, usually when you leave college, it's, it marks a milestone. It's like, okay, this is your moment to enter into adulthood. You're done school. Your childhood kind of culminates in college, or that time when you go out into the real world. And I ended up not, feeling like I was ready, because everything I'd worked towards kind of just never came to fruition. And I thought, okay, I need something to, I need something to show for this period of my life. And I remembered my book that I made and how much I loved Charmed. Obviously, I always will. But I thought, you know what? And this was right whenever lockdown and COVID and all of that. And I'm kind of reframing my priorities, trying to push myself to get a job, like all of this sort of stuff. And I thought, you know what? I'm exhausted. I'm so exhausted. I'm just gonna take like 6 months. I don't care. Like my mom, who is a queen, she's my angel. I love her so much. She, she supported me, and she said, okay, you can live with me. It'll be fine. Like, just do what you got to do. Position yourself the way you need to. And that was the biggest gift. And it changed my life, because I was able to I'm like, listen, if I'm in shackles and I have to work for the system, I have to be someone else's, slave at a company forever, like I'll do it, whatever. But I'm going to put my foot down for 6 months and just say, I'm doing it my way, just for now. And this is what I used my time, to do. I decided that I was going to make this book. So I kind of pick up the research habit again, and I'm obsessively looking online. And at first I wasn't thinking of totally making it from scratch, but I wanted to see. I'm especially, one thing you learn as an artist is that collaboration, team efforts, contributions. You can't do everything on your own. You can actually. You can do things totally on your own. But you'll find either in some way, shape, or form, you are eliciting the resources, information, things. It's always a collaborative effort. As a society, we work on the shoulders of, our ancestors or of others. And so I thought, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And I compensated for my weaknesses by buying things from other people and, whatever. And I also, focused on my strengths and tried to contribute and create something that really showed my strengths. So making this book was a test for myself. I wanted to show that I could set my sights on creating something. And it actually come to fruition. I finish it. I successfully do so. And it meets all my expectations. And this is one thing that I can say that does. Now my bar was not just to have a book that looked like it wasn't just a fun project. It was about testing myself. It was about creating something that not only looked like the book from Charmed, but there was almost this kind of like suspension of disbelief that it wasn't the real book. Like I wanted that feeling that it was real. it was just so close that it was almost indistinguishable. And that's the bar. That was my expectation, which is extremely high. One thing I've come to learn with this book is that a lot of people have different ideas of what the book looks like, because depending on how it was shot, or how they remember the book, everyone has a different kind of image of what the book looks like. So what I might think is an indistinguishable book may not be the same for you. And so I wanted to tailor it specifically to that, and to meeting that expectation of creating an object that had an eerie experience of feeling vaguely familiar or eerily similar, almost as if it was the real thing. That was the goal. That was an extremely high bar, so I set out to do that. I'm a replica artist. I've always been that type of person where I can take something from reality, like a photograph, and like copy it, or like that sort of thing. So it's kind of eliciting the same skills when you're replicating something. It's about looking at your reference and copying, and iterating until you get to that point where they become identical. So the first thing about the book is the fact that it's not totally my creation from scratch, totally like everything made totally from scratch by myself. There's a huge, enormous, rich community around this book. And just like, it's like I called upon my ancestors from the show, obviously. If you have seen the abundance of information on the Charmed wiki pages, if you've seen the huge kind of collaborative collection, it's almost like people trade replica pages like trading cards. You can buy a pack off Etsy, you can find friends and artists, other people that have contributed or made them for themselves, and buy them from them. And people, everybody seems to amass their own collection of all these pages. And also there are sellers who sell covers on Etsy, online, on eBay, all over. And so I knew that there was a rich community that I could take advantage of to compensate for the things that either I couldn't do, or that would take too long to kind of complete. So there was already this wealth of things that other Charmed fans had accomplished. So why not take those parts, survey the environment, figure out where's the best of the best everywhere, collect all of that together, and then build on top of that. So that's what I did. I found the best replica pages. That was loud. I found the best replica pages I could find anywhere, which was finding, obviously artists who love Charmed and have done replicas. Obviously the pages from the Charmed magazine, we have actual scans of the pages from the Charmed magazine. And then also, Facebook pages have like free, replica pages, or, buying a pack off Etsy. So I dipped into all of those. I amassed a collection, and for every page I'd have like 3 or 4 different versions. So when I created a page, it would be taking fragments. So I would use the calligraphy from this one, I would use the artwork from this one, or I would blend the artworks together in Photoshop. But either way, I would create the page from scratch in Photoshop. And this took an extremely long time. It took, like 9 to 12 months of just going over all of the 335 or so pages over and over and over and over and over. Because even when you do a page once and you're thinking, oh, this looks perfect, this looks just like the original, you look at it 2 weeks later and you're like, oh, I see more differences, I see this doesn't look right. So it took multiple times of kind of screen matching to get these pages to what I felt was imperceptibly identical. Like they needed to look indistinguishable, as if they were the same thing. And to do that for this many pages, for 300, it's almost like every single page was a project in and of itself. So this was a book where the cover was a replica project and every single page inside of it was a replica project. And so obviously, using the collection that I'd amassed from other fans, other artists, widely circulated replica pages, and the magazines, I was able to come up with the best starting base. So that then when I brought it into Photoshop and I was using the best of the best elements that exist, I could color correct them. I could warp and paint and reconfigure the proportions to match the show better. I could repaint portraits in Photoshop, but I still had like the shape or the size or, elements like that. I took what was there and built on top of it to create my own kind of collection of pages. So that's kind of the approach that I took to doing the pages, which was the hardest part because it's just so labor intensive. The other part was the cover. So the cover itself was a cover that I bought off Etsy. It was an Etsy seller. They made a great cover, but it was kind of just like the best of the best that I could get. But it wasn't like off the shelf, like perfect. So the leather wasn't like the best type that I really wanted. It does have that pebbly texture, but the original book actually doesn't have the pebbled texture. Many people think it does, it doesn't. But it's subtle enough, like it works. It still looks really good. And then the triquetra itself, because it's not the right leather, it doesn't emboss properly. So I didn't get the type of depth in the embossing of the triquetra that I wanted, but I compensated with the paint job. I used leather paints to kind of paint the book and get it looking really, really, really perfect. That was really just like I had taken a reference for the replica pages. I pull up the screen reference and then I pull up Photoshop and I take my elements that I've got thus far. I position them, warp them, get the formatting and positioning and proportions of everything right, color correct it, paint it, all of that. I did the same with the cover. So the cover was taking, the actual, cover, pulling up screen reference and just painting, in very, very, very thin layers. The interesting thing about this book is that it seems to change colors depending on the lighting situation, depending on the way that the show filmed the book. Obviously like exposure and, post-processing. There's a lot of things that kind of can manipulate the look and the color of the book. So it kind of led to a very inconsistent visual identity. So the book kind of changes and transforms depending on, different times that we see it throughout the show. Not only that, but also the book itself was changing. So they had prop people, fixing it, maintaining it, repainting it, doing all sorts of different things to it to keep it fresh. And that lends itself to a different visual identity. So I took a long time to kind of boil down what I wanted the book to look like. What was my idea of what the Charmed book looks like? Now, my personal, iconic moment of the book is when, at the end of season 7, when, the Charmed ones are battling Zanku and that he steals the book. There's an episode at the end of season 7 called Something Wicca This Way Goes. And it was also intended to be the last episode. They weren't sure if they were coming back for an 8th season. And they show this moment. It was almost like the climax of this progression of the book's narrative, just the character itself, the book, where they all come back. They're there by the book. They each put their hands on the book and they regain their confidence and they can take the book back. That was the moment because the book looked so old and it had this vintage, emerald green. Normally we see it as a Kelly green, which is a lighter, kind of more saturated, green. But this time I could tell they intentionally lit it and made it so that it looked old. Like you could see because this was a moment about heritage and all that this book meant, and the culmination of everything that, this book and them as witches had meant to them. It was a huge moment. So I know that there was particular attention paid to the way the book looked in this shot. And I think it was art directed to be what they wanted the book to look like. Whereas, holding the book in your arm, off shot in a random episode, they weren't really art directing it. This was how the book was supposed to look in this moment. So I made my book off of that, which is like a dark emerald green, like a bluish green, and it's subtle. It's not like a blue green, but it's a particular shade of green. And I created a color palette, and I locked down every single shade that required, that I needed for the book. And I bought it in leather paints, and then I did this technique of dry brushing where you take the leather paints, you kind of take your brush, you get some paint on it, and then you wipe like 90%, 95% of the paint off. You kind of scrub it off so it's just this dry brush. But it has some pigment on it, and it allows you to apply the pigment in extremely thin layers. So I spent like 2 or 3 days of like laser focus painting in these thin layers, building up depth in the cover so that you had layers that were like a yellow green. You had layers that were like, so let me put it this way. I started off painting the book dark, like the darkest green that I was going to need. And then I was going to build up my shades, my lighter tones on top of that. That creates almost like a light effect. Like it looks like it's, like you're working with light and shadow. You're kind of bringing up the lighter areas, the value, like gradually, and you can build these really nice, soft kind of hues and transitions. So I did it that way. And I worked with layers of like a yellow green and a blue green so that whenever the book is in different lighting conditions, if you have more of like a warmer light, it's going to bring out that yellow green in the book, and it'll look like a bright Kelly green. But if you put it in like a darker kind of bluish light, almost like a, like a twilight or a midnight, like blue moonlight, it'll look like an emerald green. It'll look like dark and emerald, and more of like a blue green. So I was so happy with how this book is almost like a gemstone. Like depending on the lighting situation, the colors shift and change, and it can be a little more yellow, it can be a little bit more blue, and it really mimics the way that the show shot the book. And that creates this kind of eerie, surreal feeling, because the book, obviously, there's one thing to just kind of pick, okay, that's the book that I want it to look like, and it always looked like only one version of the way you see the book in the show. But the way that this was painted, it's meant to have that effect, that depending on the lighting, depending on how you're viewing it, it will shift and it will change. You'll notice that it looks different. So that's really cool. So those were the things that I was able to contribute. My painterly skills, my artistic kind of, my replica skills of, taking what was already there and just bringing it up to that next level of going from like, oh, this looks really nice and this is like really good, to being, holy crap, that's like, oh, that's exactly the same. Like that was the goal. And that's a hard thing to do in and of itself. So that's why I didn't make all of the pages, all of the elements totally from scratch. I used that collection. I took advantage of the community, and what we have done collectively together, and built on top of that. So, yeah, and I think that was the way in which we innovate and we get to that next level of getting a better book. Because I think, obviously, one person cannot do the whole thing themselves. One person cannot get from start to finish with that end goal in mind. and achieve it within, a reasonable amount of money and time and all of that. So, you know, um, eliciting the help of others, using what was already out there to start with, and then adding, all of this, 9, 10, 12 months of my artistic contribution to painting the book, doing the depth in the cover painting or the cover paint job, all of the digital prints and the way that those have been iterated 5, 6 times for each page just to make sure the colors were perfect. The stains were all there. Every page has its unique organic stains on the parchment. Every page, if I borrowed the calligraphy from some, page that I purchased, I would remove the background always and isolate just what I wanted, which was like the calligraphy or something. Use that, adjust the colors so that the colors, the hues were right. It wasn't like a reddish black or like a brown. It was supposed to be like a really solid dark black or, like that sort of thing. And then put it on my own parchment background in Photoshop, painting the stains and the look of the parchment background, because that's 80% of the identity of the page is the parchment. And every single one of those was hand painted. So, in Photoshop. So for me, this has been such a long time coming, and I'm so proud of myself. I know that I didn't do it completely alone. I know that but what I've been able to prove to myself is that I set a goal. I had this objective of creating a book that felt like the original, that elicited the experience, the feeling, the surreal experience that I am actually holding the real book. And personally for me, when I hold the book, when I look at it, when I take photos of it, it is indistinguishable. And it's weird the effect that it has, because now when I watch the show, I feel like a weird kind of like familiarity, because the book I have looks so much like that when I see the book in the show, I know the experience of holding the book. I know what it looks like to hold that object. And it feels like my book, and that's like such a cool experience. Obviously it's not, but it's really, really fun. And it was the whole point of doing it, is to make my dream come true, of reaching into the world of this fantasy world that Charmed had created, and to manifest into the real world, into my world, the object of my desire, which was that book, so that I could enjoy it, so that I could have it, so that I could love it. Because, otherwise you're just a fan who lives inside the show, through the screen, looking at the book, loving the book, wishing you had it, and never really getting that opportunity to have it for yourself and own it, So, and for that to really feel the way that it should feel, the book needs to be right. It needs to look the same. It needs to be almost imperceptible. The differences, so that's the thing, is the last comment I want to make about the cover was and all of the pages, the replica standard is the fact that, I really learned a lot about how our brains interpret color, and how our brains interpret, all sorts of different, how we interpret visual information in our eyes, in our brain. There's so much detail and subtleties and information that our subconscious brain recognizes when we look at something that our conscious brain will overlook. And the fact that, being a replica artist is about trying to take the time to slow down and to notice those details and those subtleties that create the visual identity of something so organic. The book is made of leather. It uses water marbling for the inside paper, which is an organic process. It has staining, which is an organic process. It has paint, and the application of paint is an organic process. So there's all of these unique products of nature that are so unique and characteristic that you can't just do the same process again and get the same result. Splattering paint on a wall is going to look different every single time. So in recreating those paint splatters, if you get what I'm saying, is meticulous, and it takes an enormous attention to detail to notice the way that the lines of the staining go, and then to put those in, to see the way that on the cover the scratches are not just scratched or worn away, they also have like a tan color because the leather inside is showing through, which is tan. And being able to put that in, like all of those subtle elements create an interpretation of the book that's not superficial. It has depth to it. When you look at it, there's a reason that it looks so similar that you necessarily can't identify, like you don't really know why, because every little stain, every little mark, every little scratch, and every little thing has been meticulously put there because it's on the original book. And when you take a step back and it all kind of melts together, it feels real, which is really, really cool. So, this book stands as a icon for me. It represents my artistic ability, my ability to take something in my mind or in my heart and to figure out whether it's taking resources and elements from, the world around me or whatever I can produce, but doing whatever I, need to in order to create a result that lives up to my expectations. That's not easy, and that's not simple. And to accomplish that is extremely validating for me as an artist. So that means that if I am not replicating something, but I come up with an idea of something and I want to create a sketch of it and I use my imagination to create something I want to make, I'll be able to manifest that into the real world. I'll be able to create that for myself with my creative skills, because this is a standing example, a daily reminder of the fact that when you set your mind to do something, when you focus, you work hard, and you're doing something out of passion, that you can do anything. You can take the most astronomically insane ideas of, like, imagine that. I set out thinking, I have this magical book from a show that I watched as a kid. I want to have the book, but not just have a book that looks like it. I want a book that tricks my brain, because on a subconscious level, there's so many details there that it tricks my brain into thinking that it's the same one as in the show. Like, what? Like, that's so ridiculous. And the fact that I was able to do it, whether it feels that way for you, there's an in-person experience that I've had, and it's also like just for myself, that I know that I got there. I know that I did it. And the fact that I did is just so special, and it means so much to me. So, today, what I have to do is, I've done most of the pages. The only thing I need to do is hole punch. So not all of them are hole punched. I did many reprints. I've done 4. Every page has probably been printed maybe at least 3 times, maybe 4, to make sure that the color's printed perfectly. So that, that was a whole debacle too. I won't get into that. But printing is complicated. And getting the colors accurate to do my digital replica work justice. Like, imagine that. You put all this time into creating a digital painting that looks exactly like the original, but then you print it and the colors are off and it's fuzzy and it doesn't look right. That was a huge kind of threat to me reaching my goal. So I ended up printing the pages many times, but I got it. I got the pages printing properly. I got them looking the way that they should. I got it to translate to the final product, which was really good. And I was worried for a while that I wouldn't be able to. So all I have to do, I mean, there are a few pages that I do have to still put the gold and silver calligraphy on, because some of the charm pages have gold and silver metallic calligraphy. Obviously you can't print that, so I put it in manually. But hole punches and a few calligraphy, and it's done. I'm gonna put it in the book, and it'll be done, and then I'll be ready to film my big final video. It's gonna be so much fun. It's gonna be camp. It's gonna be like, it's gonna be the obsessive Charmed fans like guilty pleasure. It's gonna, for me, it's gonna be like, I have all these like effects and all these cool like ideas of how we're gonna do it. It's really exciting for me, so don't watch me geek over it. It's embarrassing. But it's gonna be fun. So I'm super pumped. I'm like super excited. Like, this is such a great thing. And I just, yeah, so I'm gonna keep going, keep on keeping on, and you guys will get to see the finished results.